Holy shit, it's Julie Mason.
Hi, Pete.
We're doing it. Thank you so much for joining me. It's so great to reconnect with you for the last however long we've been talking, and I'm really happy to have you on this show so I can ask you a billion questions.
It's such a tonic to see you again, Pete. I really miss you. And you know, your listeners on SiriusXM, I hear from them all the time, and they still say to me, I miss Pete Dominic. I'm like, okay, me too.
Well, yeah. How is one ever supposed to handle that? I had that experience too, for sure, when I went into other people's time slots. And oh God, they hated me. The Jay Thomas fans despised me, or the Ron fan, whoever it was. And I never blamed them. I was like, listen, like, I didn't move into this house because I didn't kick him out of the house. It's a weird thing though to have to handle. Are you taking callers?
No, I mean, it's 6 a.m. No one wants to talk. They just want to listen. It's all right.
So you're on in mornings now, and I miss you too. I miss working with you. I just, when you came into the company, I knew I was always smart enough to like know as much as I could about a person before I said one word to them.
Ooh.
And when I saw that you'd been, when I saw you'd been hired, I was like, oh, okay, so this is the direction that POTUS is going. They hired this person who has done all these things. This is a serious journalist, doing. And I always thought that was a really great move for them. And it still is a great move for them. And that's still a really good channel. And I wanted to ask you, for listeners of this podcast now, to just say, what did you do before you got into radio and on the politics channel?
I was a newspaper reporter for like 25 years before I got into radio, covering almost all politics, local, state, national, presidential campaigns, the White House. I'd been a White House reporter for 10 years when I came to SiriusXM. So I brought a lot of experience, which was funny because I was new to radio, but I was not new to news. But a lot of listeners, they don't like a girl talking about politics. So they would tell me that maybe I should host a cooking show or, stop giggling all day.
When you started there, that's what you would hear?
Yeah, I heard it for like the first 10 years.
Some of those comments were from me, but it wasn't because I didn't think you were good. It was just like, I wanted that slot. Let me just.
I worked 12 to 3 when I started. You didn't want that slot.
I also didn't send those emails. I was genuinely psyched to have you. I thought my point was, I thought you being hired gave the channel a lot of credibility in the company. And that's how I always saw things. Well, what do I get out of this? This is good. This is good for the company, so it's good for me. Mm-hmm. When you were a newspaper reporter, like how was that so much? How was that different than what you do?
Totally different. It's totally different. The relationship with the audience is completely different. All you get, like, one thing that print reporters say to each other all the time is, don't read the comments. Just don't. When you file your story, they post it online. Just don't even look at it. Don't look at the comments. It's horrible. It will kill your soul. But sometimes you read the comments and it's 100% of hate. And so your relationship with the audience is one if they hate you. Right. But then when you're a broadcaster, you need to make people like you. And at work, I always had felt like my personality was a huge problem, Pete. Like, it was always a problem for management. I was always kind of mouthy and sort of obnoxious. The traits that make a good journalist don't make a good employee. And so my audience hated me and management mostly hated me. And so then I came to SiriusXM, where it's completely different, and you want to be liked and you want the audience to like you, and you work towards that. So it's a completely different relationship all around, and management seems to like me okay.
You've been there for a long time. I mean, I don't even know. I can't imagine what. I always thought you and your show were completely left alone. Like, she's really good, and your producer Patrick's really good. It's like, they do great work. Let them do their work. I kind of felt like that was probably mostly the thing. And
I mean, no, they haven't meddled, but they do give me direction and tell me what's expected. And they check in with me all the time and will sort of sometimes redirect and say, well, a little less of that and a little more of this. And
Sure. But I'm saying you're being self-deprecating, and I'm just saying, no, but the fact that you never got any trouble or never, is because you do great work. And a manager wants that. Certainly the executives at SiriusXM who we're talking about, like, they definitely want to not have to work on this thing or that thing. They want it. There's a lot of putting out fires in media management, and they would rather not have a fire to worry about. And I always felt like you weren't ever starting or even near any fires.
Thanks. Yeah. I try not to, even while handling, some pretty incendiary topics. At politics, Pete, as you know, like we used to say in political journalism that it was like sports, and people like followed it like their sports team. And that was considered sort of like, we looked at it as journalists, kind of a bad thing, right? That sports and politics are two different things. Let's keep them separate. But now people follow politics like it's religion, and they hate the other religions. And it's actually gotten worse. So the topics, I feel, are even more sensitive now.
Yeah, it's such a great point, such a great analogy. It's a great way of talking about how it's evolved as well. Mm-hmm. When you're on the POTUS channel, you know that you are talking to a national audience, and Canadians too, right? and
in Mexico, yeah.
Yeah, and international, I mean, you can listen, obviously, SiriusXM or pretty much everything anywhere now. But when you're at the Texas Tribune?
No, I was at the Houston Chronicle and Politico, and briefly at the Examiner.
Did I insult a Texas reporter with the Texas Tribune?
No, not at all. I love the Tribune.
Yeah. So when you're at those three outlets, like who is that audience and who are you writing for, and how does it change? Because we've always heard this word, the Beltway media, which I think you're a member of good standing in. Mm-hmm. And who is that reporting for, and who are subscribing to those newsletters and reading those? And then with POTUS, it's like you have some guy driving his truck in Canada or in Idaho, and you want that guy to enjoy the conversation, get something from the conversation, but maybe it has to be delivered a little bit differently, or maybe it doesn't. What do you think about how people
my approach has always been that what makes politics fun, Pete, is most politicians are at least half crazy, right? But they're funny, they're fun, and they're fun to talk to. And, having spent 20 years covering Texas politics, like I love Republicans, and I have as many on the show as I possibly can. And I love to chat with them about things. I mean, news things as well, but also to show a bit of their humanity. And I think that helps draw people into politics, because I think a lot of people approach politics with a certain resistance, saying it's boring, the issues are boring, the people are robots, this has nothing to do with my life. And my idea was to make it fun and interesting and sort of quirky, but also serious without taking away any of its seriousness, but make it sort of accessible and make it so people enjoyed politics and kind of got a kick out of it, rather than seeing it as like, my team wins, your team has to die, which is not an approach to politics I support.
So you're interviewing a lot of congressmen and congresswomen now, right?
Senators and governors, yeah.
And politicians serving.
Yeah.
And is there a difference between Republicans and Democrats in terms of getting them on the show? Because, reading Cameron Joseph's piece and hearing your interview with him before I talked with him at Vice News is really interesting to learn about the relationship that, reporters now have with the people they're covering as a result of the insurrection, what happened there. They were all there, and their different, interpretations of it. And just the Trump years of the media is the enemy of the people, and like you're the enemy. Do you have trouble right now getting Republicans on?
No, not at all.
Not at all.
People will come on if it's in their interest to do so. A lot of people who come on are running for another office or higher office or re-election, and it is in their interest to do so. And I also find that some of the sort of outlier Republicans who go a little crazy on like Fox News or Newsmax or OAN will come on SiriusXM onto the POTUS channel, and they'll be very reasonable, and they won't say that crazy stuff, and they just want to have a conversation and maybe show a different side of themselves. And I'm here for that. I'm not interested in being a fact checker, getting into arguments. One of the things, Pete, that frustrates me is that cable has gone, some more than others, to this model of like getting a Republican on to argue with them, to yell at them, to confront them.
Yeah, for sure.
That's not journalism. It has nothing to do with journalism. It's performative, something, partisanship. But it's also a trap that journalists fall into, because Republicans will say something like something outrageous, and they're trying to manipulate a journalist, especially in a broadcast situation, into taking the Democrats' position, right? They'll say something so that I'll come at them like I'm working for the DNC. And I'm not taking that bait. I'm not taking that bait at all. But I think people's expectations are now that an anchor will argue with a guest. And I feel like our audience is really smart. I mean, you know them. You know how educated and smart and up to date on.
I dumbed them down for 4 years. They were-
You didn't. No, you didn't. Anyway, so I trust them to know what's going on, that I don't have to interject and say, well, actually, Congressman, that's not quite correct. And I'm not into that. I don't like to do that.
Do you have, like, let's continue. I've always had a lot of respect for, and I've learned a lot from you when you talk about journalism, you talk about reporting, you talk about even the nuts and bolts of it, the day to day, and what you think the responsibilities there are. And so how do you kind of just touch on this, define your responsibility as a journalist doing what you're doing on the radio every day on POTUS? What's your purpose?
Well, I know. God, that's such a direct question. I wish I had like a snappy answer to it. But it's a few things, right? Because it's to entertain and inform.
Mm-hmm.
It's also to provide added value. And I feel like my experience and my background and my relationship with a lot of these people who come on the show, and a lot of them are pre-existing relationships, people I've known for years, sources of mine who come on the show now, and they're relaxed because they know me and they know I'm not going to ask a stupid gotcha question or ask them like, can you define critical race theory? Like, we're not doing that. You know, we're going to be smarter than that. And I think that's my obligation.
So I've loved listening to your interviews with all of these journalists because of what you're saying, your relationship with them and your understanding of the work that they do. And so just a question on what has changed. You know, we both talked to Cameron Joseph and read that piece, but more importantly, you're in DC. You know probably most of the reporters that were up there that day. And I don't know what you were doing, but I wonder what you think about if that was an inflection point for journalists covering at least the Republicans that were there that day, because they all had that experience. It's a very strange thing to look at I'm trying to look at it from a journalist point of view, covering a Republican congressman who won't get vaccinated and won't wear a mask and won't admit that they got attacked, and what that changes the dynamic. So from the people, first of all, what were you doing that day and how has it affected you? Let me ask you.
I'd already finished up my show and I wasn't up on the Hill, so it didn't affect me. I watched it in horror, the same as everyone. But I would go further back to Trump and Trump being a real inflection point for journalism.
Okay.
We used to be able to have like a comfortable distance from events, right? Like as a journalist, you'd go to events and you'd cover events, but you were not of the event. But then during the Trump era, and I really can't place it before Trump, but for example, you think of Lafayette Square and the clearing of Lafayette Square. Journalists were hurt. They were attacked. They were really, really hurt by police, by the crowds. They were swept up with the protesters and their equipment was damaged and things like that. And that didn't happen before. You could go into a war zone and be in a bit of danger, but you'd have a big thing that said press and everyone knew that you were Switzerland, that you were just there to cover events and it was in their interest to leave you alone.
Right.
But now journalists are getting swept up in these events and there's no more of that protection. There's no more of that sort of force field, that invisible force field around journalists. So now, like when you see it when they're covering, riots and protests around the country, they're getting arrested, they're getting beaten. And then you saw it at the Capitol. They were victims too. New York Times photographer was thrown to the ground and beaten. Her equipment was stolen. People were filming it. You saw that equipment outside of the Capitol that got smashed and they were writing like kill the media or something in graffiti. So we have come now, like, we're no longer hands off. And I think that's really changed the industry a lot. People are less willing to take risks for their jobs because now it is a real danger and a real risk. And they're reevaluating what they're willing to do with their careers. And you see what happened on the Hill. It was so bad. And journalists were really damaged by it. And it has a lingering after effect. I don't know how it changes coverage. People are professionals and they go about their job. And it hasn't changed how I cover the work, but I'm really curious and worried about my colleagues on the Hill.
Some journalists have created kind of a new threshold of who they'll even have on their program based on kind of a litmus test over the insurrection and the election. If they're going to say that Trump won the election, then they're not going to be invited on.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any kind of a test like that for anybody?
Because I cover politics the way they are, Pete, not the way we would wish them to be. I don't have the luxury of only having virtuous, upright Democrats. I mean, I can't have Sherrod Brown on the show every day. Sometimes I gotta throw someone else in, and I'm happy to do that because a lot of people were stunned and surprised by Trump's victory, right? His win in 2016. People didn't see that coming. Well, I'm not going to let that happen where people don't see that it's coming, that Republicans are probably going to take over the House this year. And we need to understand what their messaging is, what they're talking about, how it's resonating with people. But to only have like virtuous, upright, non-traitors on the show would be a disservice to what we're trying to do. Got to have all the voices so that we understand what's happening. I almost consider it like I tell listeners who are Democrats, like think of it as getting a glimpse into the other team's playbook. You get to understand where they're coming from and what they're saying. If you're only going to want to hear from Democrats, if you only want an echo chamber, well, you're probably saying like, it's so bad about those Republicans in their echo chamber while you only watch Rachel Maddow,
I do know. I live in that echo chamber most of the time. Yeah, I listen to. I've been listening to Ben Shapiro lately, his podcast, and I'm learning more about podcasting than I am about his political point of view because he just does like so many ads and plugs and everything. I'm like, that's the other thing about like radio too. At least at Sirius, like I wasn't doing live reads and I wasn't selling a book. Like if you listen to like a Mark Levin, for example, is one of the biggest right-wing radio, like he's selling stuff like half the time.
Mm-hmm. I gotta make a buck, right?
Yeah, but I was kind of like, even if I loved you, like I don't want to hear. Can you talk with somebody about something? Like, how is this interesting? It just ruined the experience for me. Anyway, by the way, I do have to do a live read for Meat right now, Julie. Sorry, Meat. It's coming in a box. I'll be doing that soon. Okay, that's it. It's over.
I do live reads. I'm happy to do it. I do get some grief about it. I do get people saying, well, you have no credibility because you do live read, you do live ads. I'm like, well, if this ad for a mattress that I actually love undermines, 35 years in journalism, then okay. I don't care. It's important. I mean, it keeps people in work. We had layoffs, people lost their jobs. The company, I don't know what the numbers are, but every company that relies on subscribers and advertising was hurt in the pandemic. So I did do it.
When I was at Sirius, I did a live read for My Pillow.
My Pillow. Wow.
Which I now call, I just saw this yesterday on Twitter and I think it's funny. Hee hee ha ha. It's Mine Pillow.
Did they send you those free? Did you like them? Were they good? Were those good?
Oh God, it really was like I had no idea about that man or his politics. I didn't even know he was like this very Christian guy or anything. None of it. All I knew was I remember thinking, I'm like, oh my God, this is a pillow, and it's like the only pillow I've ever seen marketed, and it's awful. It's like chunky.
Is it full of buckwheat or something? It's full of husks or.
It's all onions, hard onions. Yeah, they have a garlic one for Steve Bannon.
For vampires and Bannon.
I don't know if there's an and there, or he's the leader. So what's next? I want to ask you more about where we're at. I mean, I want to get your analysis. I do want to get your analysis on politics a little bit in terms of the elections and the midterms. With all this, I don't know how much you think the voting rights issues will affect the actual elections in different states and districts, or the census, or gerrymandering. We can talk about all of that, but the broader question I have for someone as plugged in as you is, what do you think about the midterm elections? Is there any way should we be talking about them? Are they too far away? Can it change?
It's happening. People are running hard for next year's elections already. I mean, already for president for 2024, that's happening. We talk about that, and you have to talk about all of it because it's happening. I get that people aren't comfortable with how long and arduous these campaigns are, but it's once again, it's covering politics the way they are and not the way they ought to be. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think it's frustrating because Republicans just seem in a grip of madness right now, and hashtag not all Republicans, but a goodly number. But at the same time, as I said, I do think they're well positioned to take at least the House in the midterms. I don't know about the Senate, but it feels in DC right now, Pete, it feels like divided government. Even though Democrats are running everything, they're really not. It just feels like it's still like half and half.
Who's running for president?
Oh God, all those Republicans. I mean,
who are we talking
Nikki Haley, Mike Pompeo, Josh Hawley, probably Ted Cruz, probably Chris Christie, the whole gang. They're all out there. They're all like Rick Scott making surreptitious trips to Iowa, things like that. They're all starting.
Is there
Ron
any?
DeSantis.
I that was the top name I was thinking, but is there anybody? Can a Republican get the nomination? And not have the Donald Trump support? Well,
that's what the midterms are going to tell us, in part, about the strength of Trump's grip on the party, because he's already making endorsements. He's already out there endorsing candidates, here and there. He's going to do more in primary races too. He's picking and choosing candidates, and we'll see if he gets a whole slate elected. Then that says something about 2024. But I mean, I don't even know if he's going to run. Do you? I mean, what's your vibe? How are you vibing on Trump running in 2024? It seems unlikely to me.
I think that it's hard to know. It all. I feel like it matters, like a lot of the legal stuff that's happening in terms of how much attention he might need to pay that, and want to be involved with that. But I mean, my answer about Donald Trump has always got to be the same. As like, he's always going to do whatever is best for him and what he wants, and it's certainly a good way to make money, I guess. So he's, and before we took him seriously, he ran like a bunch of times, right? Because it was just a way to get his name out there.
Yeah.
And why anybody does it. And so I don't know. That's I think it's all about like if he can make money on it, and maybe he has to, because I don't know. I can't imagine like how you get sued by so many different directions and afford the defense. That's crazy. I almost feel bad for him. I'm like, couldn't we just point to anybody that couldn't we just point to anybody we don't like? And send a bunch of lawsuits their way if we had the funding on our side, and then they would be. And that's what he used to do to people that he owed money to. So I don't know. That's crazy to me what's happening with him. But the question about his endorsement is everything to me. Like for every single district, like certain districts that maybe you might not need it, but I feel like still. People
really want it. Candidates really want it. They're competing for it. They're vying for it. It's Canis Mas Maga. Like who can hug him tightest? Who can be more like him? And whether that wins or not, I don't know.
Yeah, it's
in
really.
Some places it will.
How do you think the pandemic and the reaction to it, certainly right now, in terms of the vaccinations? And seeing, it's so crazy to me that you actually, Julia Mason, who's a political analyst, really, really well respected one, very good at it, has been doing it for a long time, can look at this. But now you also can kind of look at like epidemiology and say, holy shit, Julie, the blue states, literally the districts are vaccinated and the red ones are not. It's connected like directly to politics.
And here's what I don't get is, there's this complaint out of the red districts that Trump doesn't get enough credit for the vaccine, and it's his vaccine, and no one's taking that away from him, and yet they still won't get it. Like they love Trump, but they don't love his vaccine. I mean, he brought these vaccines forward. He made that happen, and they still won't take it. That's what I don't understand. That's the disconnect for me.
And wouldn't that all change if he had gotten vaccinated on camera and just said, go do it?
Maybe.
I don't know. Maybe.
I don't know.
No, it's a great point, but I wonder how that affects elections. I wonder how the vaccination rollout or the pandemic or COVID affects the midterms.
I mean, polling has been rendered so useless largely because it's like everything falls along partisan lines now. Like everything. Although, Biden's handling of the pandemic has registered in about the low 60s, like 63-ish% approval. So that's a little bit bipartisan, but so many other things, it just breaks down along partisan lines. And it's like, you don't even really have to poll anymore. You just have to imagine that half the country likes it and half the country hates it. And that's just how it's going to be on any subject.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. What about polling? That's my question. That's my question to you. What about polling?
polling is still legit, and pollsters still are trying to do good and serious work. What it hurts me, and it harms our system that so many people have lost faith in it. It's I would say it's analogous to how many people have lost faith in journalism. But I think part of it is just not understanding how polling works. People always say to me, "Well, no one's ever called me." It's like, I don't know, 330 million people in this country. They're going to get around to you eventually. Maybe, probably not though. And it's like, well, do you ever answer calls on your cell phone that you don't know? No. Well, you're never going to hear from a pollster then, because they have, and they say, no one has landlines. How are they polling? Well, pollsters actually have your cell phone number in a book. They have that. They have those numbers, and they're calling you. It's just, it says something weird, so you're not picking up.
The sign of a really good radio host is someone who can do both sides and both voices. You've always been so good at that. I love when you do that. Is anybody calling you? No. You have so many characters in your repertoire that you can go to. These are based on real people. I've always suspected. That's also like a death of expertise in general. You mentioned journalists and pollsters. There's institutions in general have taken such a beating, and I don't know how that
called health experts like Fauci, so-called. Like, come on.
Or just like, is something less.
How they made a villain of that guy, Pete? I have no idea. I'm sorry. Go on.
Well, no, it's so much to say about that. But I mean, do you think there's any way that changes, given how fragmented, to the point you mentioned about our echo chambers? Like, you can stay in with podcasting and YouTube, like everybody has a show now for every brand of stripe. Mm-hmm. So I have a hard time seeing how it might change back to something more moderated, where we can hear a bunch of, just a thorough report on a thing. Objectively reported. Does it change back? Do we ever, how do we do this?
I don't know. The country's just too big, and things do go in cycles and everything like that. But I don't know. There's just too much fragmentation. As you say, people can choose their own adventure in the information they get. And it's just hard to see that changing. It used to be Republicans used to agree that climate change was real. It just, the dispute was what caused it and how to fix it. But everyone was like, yes, climate change is real, agreed upon fact. And then, and then you go forward, and then there's the debate. But now, now it's like, it's a hoax. It's a lie. It's BS.
Yeah. I mean, that changed when they found out that the solution was there's going to be a cost. We have to do something. Uh-huh. It's one thing to be like, yeah, that's terrible. Well, we have to stop. We have to do something. We have to invest in it, raise taxes, do it. Everybody's got to be in on this solution. Nah, it's not a thing, man. It's not a thing. Before I let you go, and I could talk to you for 17 hours, you have always been someone who I've looked up to as a female professional, meaning you always took seriously yourself as a woman, and you struck me as someone who was never looking at gender and being intimidated by men the way that a lot of women rightfully can be. And I love to watch you carry yourself at work. I love to watch you talk openly, and it could sometimes be intimidating, but I was like, but that's what I like. That's what I need. That's what we need, is someone who's going to tell you the truth, and also, more importantly, pivoting now to advocating for other women as well. You've always been that way. You've always been true, I think, to that, and advocating for women and standing up for women in the workspace in journalism in Washington. How has that changed in the last few years? Do you think things are better? Are there more opportunities? Is there any less sexism in, even the kind of the subtle kind?
No, nothing changed.
I'm so sorry for laughing.
It's true, though. I'm not gonna be like, yeah, Me Too really changed everything, Pete. It's a whole different culture now. No, and I don't just. Yeah, no, I mean worldwide. It's different because I do a lot of mentoring of young women in journalism, and some of my mentees have gone to great places, just gone on to fantastic careers, awesome. All of which I take entire credit for, which they roll their eyes at, but I mention it frequently to the point of. Yeah. Anyway, but I helped a bunch of people get hired at Sirius, and then they fired me.
No, it's the thing that you're most proud of is the mentorship. Go ahead. Sorry.
I am really proud of it. And but younger women coming up today are much more activist. They want their journalism. And when I speak to classes too, I notice it. The questions I get are, how do you use your feminism, or how do you use journalism to promote feminism? And to me, the question is almost offensive. Like, I do not. Like, certainly I'm interested in feminism and the expressions of feminism, but I do not use journalism to promote it. Like, that's not. And they say, well, what are the issues you care about? And I'm like, none of your business, really. Like, that's not, like, it's not a thing. But they're all looking to journalism as a way to push an agenda, which worries me a lot about this younger generation coming up, and it concerns me, because they will find a place in our fractured sort of news media landscape. They will find a place to push an agenda, but I think it's a terrible trend in journalism. And I will say, going back to your point about my embodiment of confidence in the workplace.
Yeah, by the way, I muddled through that and feel shitty about how I verbalized it. I wish I could have done a better job.
No, are you kidding? That's one of the nicest things anyone has ever said to me.
Well, I'm glad you feel that way. I just wish I could have been more specific about what I meant.
I get what you mean. A lot of that goes back to when I was a City Hall reporter in Houston, Texas, and I was doing these series of stories about public housing. And I actually called the mayor a liar on the front page of the paper. And this was the biggest paper in the state, 500,000 daily readers, and I called the mayor a liar on the front page, and I stood by it, and I owned it, and the mayor was furious, screaming to the paper in his motorcade to meet with the publisher and throw a fit. And my mentor, who was an older man, came over to me and nudged me and said, "Way to slap the suits around. Nice." And I was like, yes. And I thought, that's how I always want to feel. I want to feel like I did something right. I called someone out, and I am ready to slap the suits around. And that just made me feel good. And when I think about that, and I think about, for example, Liz Cheney, she's someone who slaps the suits around too. She doesn't care. She'll take anyone out. And she is like truthful and sort of righteous. And it's kind of fun to watch.
Well, that's what I was gonna say about you. I love to watch you. I loved it. I watched you move through space. We didn't work, in the same space a lot, but whenever I was around you, I really observed your behavior, and then I observed the behavior of other people reacting to it, and I honestly do think I think about you when I think about my daughters. I'm like, I hope that my daughters are able to kind of behave similarly. Not that it's my choice or whatever they want, but I've always admired that about you, and hope that there's not a lot of women that are necessarily on air positions even, and those that are, it's like I feel so bad for them because they don't have a lot of role models, and I just always saw you as someone who was that person. And I think it's a tribute to your previous work too, as you just said. You're not gonna. I think I share that to some extent, not the gender thing, but going from stand-up comedy into corporate media, I was like, I don't give a shit. Are you serious right now? Do you know what I've done? Do you know where I've been? That's you.
Thank you. That's a wonderful thing to say to me. I really appreciate it.
All right. Well, thank you very much. You tell me whenever you want to come on. I would talk to you every day. Who would you talk to if you could get them to join you every day? Maybe that's not a great question, but you talk to so many good, let's say, reporters and journalists. Who's someone that you really always look forward to talking to on your show?
Maureen Dowd is always really funny, and Dana Milbank is hilarious. But, my show now is more like politicians and stuff. Mm-hmm. And I've been trying to get George W. Bush. He's out of it. He just does not want to do it. But, there's been all these things that sort of percolate, and it would almost be great to have him as the color man, and he could just use whatever profanity he wanted. He could chuckle and say anything. Yeah. And his commentary, I think, would be hilarious.
Yeah, he would never do that. He would be if he were, to be honest and transparent about his personality, but I bet you he wouldn't.
Yeah. Do you remember his comment after Trump's inauguration? He turned to Hillary Clinton and said, "That was some weird shit."
I love talking to you. That'd be hell. I live for the day that you interview that guy. And Julie, thank you for letting me interview you today and talking to you. And I hope to see you and talk to you real soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Pete.